When you hear the name Moses, what comes to mind? For thousands of years, his name has been synonymous with faith, freedom, and the law. His is a story that has profoundly shaped our world. And today, we're going to find out just how deep that influence goes.
Think about it. The story starts with these incredible, almost mythic images. A baby in a basket floating down the Nile River, escaping certain death.
And it builds into this epic of liberation, with a moment so powerful it's been imagined and reimagined for centuries. An entire sea split in two.
And finally, it gives us 10 fundamental laws, literally carved in stone. But here's the big question we're going to tackle. How much of this incredible story is history, and how much is something else entirely?
Before we dive in, you've got to understand just how huge his influence is. I mean, the story of Moses isn't just one story. It's a foundational narrative for billions of people. He's a central prophet in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That's absolutely massive. Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with Moses' truly dramatic early life. Then we'll get into his epic confrontation with Pharaoh, follow the legendary 40-year journey through the desert, and finally, we'll dig into the really tough questions about the historical evidence. So our story kicks off in ancient Egypt. The pharaoh is getting nervous. The Hebrew people living there are growing in number, and he sees them as a threat. So he issues a horrifying decree. Every single newborn Hebrew boy must be drowned in the Nile.
But one mother desperately tries to save her son. She places him in a waterproof basket and sets him adrift on the river. And in an incredible twist of fate, who finds him? Pharaoh's own daughter. She adopts him, raises him as a prince of Egypt, and gives him the name Moses. He grows up with all the privilege of royalty, but his life completely changes the day he sees an Egyptian foreman brutalizing a Hebrew slave and, in a flash of rage, kills him. When his crime is exposed, Moses has no choice but to flee. He becomes a fugitive, running from the very palace that once saved him.
So, Moses spends decades in exile, living a quiet life as a shepherd. And then, one day, something impossible happens. He sees a bush that's completely engulfed in flames, but it's not burning up. And from within this fire, a voice, identifying itself as God, gives him a mission that seems absolutely insane. Go back to Egypt. Go back and free your people.
I mean, how do you even start that conversation? You're supposed to walk up to a man who's considered a living God and tell him to release his entire slave labor force? Moses himself says he's not a great speaker, so he brings his brother, Aaron, along. Together, they go before the new pharaoh, who some traditions say was actually like a brother to Moses growing up, and they deliver the message, "Let my people go."
Pharaoh, not surprisingly, refuses. I mean, he sees himself as divine. And in response, a series of 10 absolutely devastating plagues are unleashed upon Egypt. Each time Pharaoh digs in his heels, the next disaster gets worse. The Nile River turns to blood. Swarms of frogs, lice, and flies descend. The entire sky goes dark. It all culminates in the most terrible plague imaginable, the death of every single firstborn son in Egypt. After that final, horrifying plague, Pharaoh is broken. He finally gives in. That very night, Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt in the Great Exodus. But, their journey to the so-called Promised Land, well, it was far from over. This wasn't going to be a quick trip. Nope. Instead, it became a 40-year ordeal, a long wandering in the unforgiving desert. And this period wasn't just about travel. It was a time of testing, of forging a new identity for a people who had only ever known slavery.
And it's during this long journey that one of the most pivotal moments happens. Moses climbs Mount Sinai and comes back down with a set of divine laws on 2 stone tablets. These are the 10 Commandments. And these principles you see here, they didn't just form the moral bedrock for the nation of Israel. Their influence has rippled out across the entire world. So, that's the epic story, a cornerstone of faith for billions. It's incredible. But now, we have to pivot. What happens when we stop looking at this just as a sacred text and start examining it through the lens of modern history and archaeology?
Right. This is where things get really fascinating and honestly pretty contentious. Scholars have been wrestling with this for centuries. Is there actual physical proof for Moses, for the Exodus?
Did any of it really happen the way the story says it did?
And this is where we hit a huge roadblock. You could even call it a wall of silence. The ancient Egyptians, they were obsessive record keepers. They wrote everything down, yet when you search their extensive records from the time of Ramesses II, the pharaoh most often connected with the Exodus, there's nothing. No mention of a massive Hebrew slave population, no mention of those catastrophic plagues, and no mention of a guy named Moses leading them all away.
But here's the twist, and it's a big one. The strongest clue we have that actually ties Moses to Egypt is his name. Moses isn't a Hebrew name, it's Egyptian. It comes from the word Mos, which means son of or is born. You see it all the time in the names of pharaohs like Thutmose, son of Thoth, or Ramesses, son of Ra. So the story itself seems to hold a genuine piece of Egyptian culture right there in its hero's name. Now, what about the miracles? Well, scholars have put forward some really interesting natural theories. For example, some suggest that 10 plagues could actually be a chain reaction of ecological disasters triggered by a massive volcanic eruption somewhere in the Mediterranean. And the famous parting of the sea? It might not have been the deep Red Sea, but a shallower Sea of Reeds, where a powerful, sustained wind could have literally pushed the water aside for a time. So all of this leads many historians to a compelling idea that the Exodus story is what's known as a foundational myth. The idea is that it's this powerful narrative, probably written down centuries after the events, that weaves together historical memories, maybe some older regional myths, like the birth story of an ancient king, Sargon of Akkad, who was also put in a basket on a river, and creates this single epic story to unite scattered tribes into one nation with one identity.
But let's be really clear here. Just because there's no direct proof, that doesn't automatically prove that a historical exodus never happened. Records from that long ago are always incomplete. And as the old saying goes, the absence of evidence isn't the same thing as the evidence of absence.
And really, this all brings us to a much deeper question. Whether Moses was a real person or a legend, whether the Exodus happened exactly as told or as a powerful allegory, the story's impact is just undeniable. It's this timeless narrative about gaining freedom from oppression, about forging a national identity through struggle, about a sacred promise that defines a people. And it makes you wonder, in the end, what's more powerful? The history we can prove, or the stories that tell us who we are?